All right, welcome everybody to another author chat here on SFF Addicts. And today I have the pleasure of chatting with my friend Luke Tarzian. He's the self published fantasy author of the Adjacent Monsters series, including the World Maker Parable and the World Breaker Requiem, as well as Vultures and the newly released novelette, A Cup of Tea at the Mouth of Hell. Luke is also an artist and book designer, a shouter of profanities, drinker of whiskey, and one of the most fun slash disturbing people to interact with on Twitter. So it's good to see you, buddy, and welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh,
That's
it's
a
an
great intro.
absolute pleasure. Yeah, fun and disturbing. That's how things are going to go today. But before we get into the interview proper, I want to know, how are you doing? How's life been?
I'm good. Life is weird. Just trying to take things one day at a time. Um, it's hectic, but I'm just kind of rolling with the punches, I guess.
Yeah, man. As we do. But really happy to chat with you. We haven't had an opportunity to do some good one-on-one, so I'm excited to learn a little bit more about you. And just to kick things off, can you tell listeners and viewers a bit more about yourself, including your relationship with SFF and reading as a young lad?
Yeah. So I guess if we just want to talk about the writing, so I got into writing through Harry Potter, before J.K. Rowling became an asshole. But no, so reading those was what really got me into writing. But as far as my work goes, um, I draw as far as influences go. I draw heavily from Neil Gaiman and Edgar Allan Poe. My stuff is definitely not on the chonky side, like
Yeah.
Crystal or
Sorry,
Thomas,
Crystal.
who's writing a 400,000 word book.
Or Angela Board. These
Yeah,
beastly books that they write.
no, but
Cool, man.
so yeah, my stuff's on the smaller side. And anyone who's read my work knows that I really like to tackle grief and mental health.
Hmm. Yeah, man. Well, we'll get into those big weighty themes, but as an artist myself, I love that you do your own book design. You do a lot of a lot of artwork for other artists as well. But like,
Yeah.
you've got a background in art. Tell me more about that. Where did that come into your life?
So I got I took an interest in art probably like first or second grade. Um, they identified me as, I guess, gifted is the term back in that day. So I so I was actually doing art before I got into writing, and for a very very long time I thought I wanted to illustrate comics, and then I, for whatever reason, just kind of put art down probably in the seventh grade, and that was kind of that. Picked up writing probably my junior year of high school, and I don't think I picked up art again until I think maybe a month after I graduated college.
Mm. What was it that
Um,
brought you back into it?
I don't know. I think it was just I was sketching something. I was just kind of bored, but I specifically remember when I got out of college. So I grew up as a huge Sonic the Hedgehog fan. I watched
Nice.
the cartoons. I had read the comics as a kid, played the video games and all that. And so when I graduated college, for whatever reason, I decided to drop by a comic shop and pick up Sonic the Hedgehog because I was, like 200 or 100 and somewhat issues behind. And so I latched back onto those. And that's sort of what got me back into doing art.
Hmm.
And from
I mean,
there, it was just kind of experimenting with more mediums. I think at that point, I also started to get into digital art. All my stuff previously had been traditional, just pen and ink or pencil and ink.
yeah. And at which point did book design, like cover design, come into it?
Um, that came in. It's funny. It's almost so I had toyed with the idea of self-publishing for a while, but um, the impetus for me self-publishing had to do with my mom being diagnosed with leukemia. My mom was my biggest supporter as a writer, and so my thing was, okay, I'm not done writing this book yet, but I would like my mom to be able to have, a physical copy to like actually, hold.
Hmm.
And so where the that's sort of where I got the start for doing my own covers.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I wanna jump back into that, you know, that impetus and everything like that. But
Mhm.
now that you do more freelance book design for self-published authors, what's kind of your approach when working on a project, and what is it that you've come to love about book design and cover design and that kind of stuff?
As far as what I love, I think I like seeing the final piece come together. It's extremely satisfying, especially knowing that I'm helping out somebody who's self-published. I mean,
Yeah.
cover art is extremely important, um, and I also just like it's cool to see your work like on a storefront or a shelf or whatnot, and
Mhm.
it's something that I can be proud of. As far as the process goes, it honestly it differs from client to client. Some people are just like, hey, here's this rough idea, like go nuts.
Yeah.
And others they have very specific idea of what they want, and so when it comes to that, well, we'll throw notes back and forth. I'll send them screenshots every like day or so, like saying, hey, this is where I'm at. Like, what do you think? What do we need to do? So I like my clients to be very involved in the process. I don't like to just kind of keep people in the dark and then go, "Hey, here's this. Good luck."
It's like, come on, man, I gotta have some proofs. Don't just give me some
Yeah,
surprise cover art.
exactly.
That's awesome though. And like looking at the covers that you've done for yourself and looking at the stuff that you've done for
Mhm.
other people, it's like I can tell, you sort of adopted your own unique style. And it's this is what I love about art. It's a lot easier
Mhm.
to see just because it's a visual medium as opposed to something
Yeah,
like writing. You can see the development of somebody's
yeah,
style and experimentation directly. Whereas, with writing, it's a lot more difficult to see, like, okay, this person's improved in such
exactly.
and such way. It's like, no, you have to read like, well, in your case, not like 500 pages each time to see that development take place. But still, it is a lot more difficult to see that progression as a creative person, as opposed to seeing your cover design and being like, oh man, this is really cool to see that and trace
Yeah,
that lineage
exactly.
of your ideas and processes.
It's been cool doing the covers for self-published authors too, or just the covers in general, because I think I started doing this probably almost 2 years ago, and it's definitely challenged me to improve as an artist, which is great. Because I look at the stuff that I did, like 2 or 3 years ago compared to what I'm doing now, and like it's like
Hmm.
night and day.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of it. And then when it comes to your writing, you mentioned that you kind of dropped off art around like seventh grade, and then in high school and everything, you were getting more into writing. What was it that drew
Yeah.
you to writing? And then how did that, play out to eventually, like deciding to self-publish your first book? You mentioned your mom getting diagnosed with leukemia. So what was that process like?
Um, it was a stressful process, but I think for me, like I had been on the fence for it so long. I'd been rejected by I don't know how many agents at that point, and for me, it was like I believe in the quality of the story. Other people clearly do as well, so that's vindicating. But for me, doing deciding to self publish wasn't so much of hey, traditional publishing doesn't want to do this, so I'm just going to do this as like a whatever. It was something I'd really considered, and like I mentioned previously, my mom being sick was sort of what um, that was sort of like the final piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, it's not like, "Oh, I'm gonna publish this myself out of spite for all these fucking
No,
traditional publishing houses or anything like that." But I think it's beautiful that, you know, obviously it's a really tragic confluence of events that led to the book being published. This is Vultures, that was your first
yeah,
one, but what was it like to put the book out there and to start getting that reception and you know, interacting with other authors or readers and that kind of thing?
it was simultaneously nerve wracking and exciting. I I think I had sort of become I'd sort of wormed my way into the community for like maybe a year at that point,
Mhm.
and I'd gotten a couple of early reviews, which like I think really sort of boosted my confidence. Nick Borelli over at Out of This World SFF was one of the first people to review Vultures. He loved it. Justine Bergman, who I don't believe is on Twitter anymore, she used to run Whispers and Wonder. Um, she was also one of the first people to give Vultures a really glowing review. And so
Mhm.
anytime I'm really feeling depressed or I feel the imposter syndrome coming up, I just go back and read those.
I mean, it must be really nice to know that, like, you have this kind of, creative therapy in these past reviews to know that it's like, yeah, imposter syndrome is something that definitely happens for a ton of creative people. You think like,
Oh yeah.
who the fuck am I to be in this position to like put my book out and hope people will read it? But then, you know, Nick is a really great guy and super good writer as well. And so to have someone like that be like, I love this book, that is, like you say, it's this clarifying experience, even if you want to go back and just kind of re-clarify that experience to boost your confidence a little bit. I think it's nice.
Yeah, exactly. Although I think he might take the review down at some point if I don't stop harassing him with the Caillou OES Daddy gif. I'll just DM it
It's
to
all
him from
good. We
time to
could re
time.
yeah. If it takes it down, we'll republish it on FanFiAddict. And now that you've sort of like you've continued your journey, you've published more books, how are you
Mhm.
feeling about your decision to self-publish in the first place? And what are your thoughts on, you know, we've talked a bit about reviewers, but what are your thoughts about the self-published community now that you've integrated yourself more into it?
I love the community. Everybody is, for the most part, everyone's extremely friendly, and it's nice seeing a group of people just trying to like collectively lift each other up. I mean,
Mm,
anybody who's in self publishing knows it's not a walk in the park. Um, so I mean, yeah, it's nice to see people. It's nice to see people get along on Twitter.
yeah. It's a beautiful thing, man. Because like that was weird for me. I avoided Twitter for so long, but then getting
Yeah.
into the SFF community and meeting so many self-pub authors and traditional published authors, and everyone's like, "Yeah, we love this stuff. We love writing. We love nerding out, and so we want to help each other out." And you know, for you, do you feel like getting into self-publishing was a good decision now that you have everything in hindsight? And if there are any aspects of your journey that you would change, or do you feel like things have gone in a way that you're satisfied with?
I don't think there's anything I would change. I mean, I feel like I 100% made the right decision. I think everybody, well, I can't speak for everybody, but I know a lot of people would like an agent. A lot of people would like traditional publishing deal. Like that's all great, but I'm comfortable with where I'm at. The only downside to self publishing for me at least is I am horrible at marketing my stuff. So
But that's why we're doing something
that's
like this.
exactly. Buy my books
But I
or I
mean,
will
in terms
find
of
you in your dreams.
you're like the Morpheus of self-published authors. But I think it's it's this double-edged sword. It's like, yeah, you have to kind of be a creative, but at the same time you have to be entrepreneurial. Do you find that balance to be something that you're improving at, or do you have, you know, goals in terms of this is where I would like to see myself improve from a marketing perspective, for example?
Oh god, I have honestly have no idea. I think I'm better. I don't know. I really don't have any benchmarks for it.
Like whatever happens, happens. We'll see what comes.
Yeah, I mean, I shout about my own stuff. I shout about my friends' stuff, and that's. I think at this point, like I have my own frustrations with sales ratings and all that stuff. I'm sure everybody does, but at this point, like I given up stressing about it. Like it's not worth it.
Mm. Yeah, because
And
I
it
can
took me a
imagine,
while to sort. Yeah, it took me a
go
while to
ahead,
get
bud.
back to that mindset. Like when I started this, it was okay. I'm not writing to make $1 million. I'm writing because I have stories to tell, and it's what I genuinely love doing. And then somewhere along the way, I don't know that I think I sort of lost sight of that, and I got obsessed with the numbers and all that other fun shit that everybody says you should not try and look at. There's a reason they tell you to stay off of Goodreads.
Oh god, man, yeah. And at the same time, it's like, as someone who includes a lot of discussion of mental health in your work, the stuff that you're dealing with yourself, I'm sure just embedding yourself in too much of that bullshit just makes all of that mental stress even worse to think of like other ratings and blah 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 blah. It's like,
Oh yeah,
life has
100%.
its enough of its own stresses to add all that crap on top of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and since your work does deal a lot with things like mental health and trauma and loss, especially in relation to your mother, how
Mhm.
does storytelling, the act of writing and crafting a story help you in those struggles?
It's 9 times out of 10, I wanna say it's extremely cathartic because it's basically like having a therapy session with yourself, except, your therapist is the various voices in your head and the characters that you're putting on the page. I say 9 times out of 10 because writing the World Breaker Requiem legit almost put me back in therapy. Like, I'm extremely proud of that book, but it fucked me up.
Yeah. It broke worlds and it broke your mind.
Yeah, exactly. It was I actually ended up, it came out, what, December 21st last year. I had actually ended up pushing the release date back about a year. So it was originally going to come out in 2020. I wasn't satisfied with where it was. I was not in a good, mental state, and then I somehow finished it in 2021, was in even worse headspace.
What was it about that process that was so tasking?
Honestly, I think it just had to deal with how dark the book was. I've talked about it previously, and I think I mentioned it in the acknowledgments, but it was sort of this really sort of this like, okay, like this is my catharsis or my sort of closure for dealing with my mom's stuff because it deals with a lot of stuff that I'm familiar with. So the main character of Arya he's the adopted son of the queen, and so he has a lot of issues with his adoptive mother. I'm adopted. I do not have issues with my mom, but I always thought it would be an interesting sort of relationship to look at in fiction and see how that would play into a character's mental state.
Yeah. So it's kind of like digging into your own past. And putting a bit of like an experimental twist onto it and seeing like
Yeah, exactly.
what would go on in this like more destructive uh thought experiment kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so after you finished that project, what was it that drove you towards A Cup of Tea at the Mouth of Hell? You know, how did all that play out? And what was that experience like writing? I mean, you kind of joke about the length of it. You call it like a novelette, if that. But what was that whole experience like writing that book?
So I wrote that because I needed a break from working on House of Muir, which is the sequel to Vultures. I'd finished writing the first act for that, and I was sort of burnt out, mostly because the stuff I write is extremely dark. It's very heavy. So I needed to write something lighter. And I don't know that it's not like I actually sat down and planned, like, okay, I'm going to write this specific story. I just had this like off the cuff thought one day, like, oh, what would happen if somebody stole the devil's tea kettle? And it was this sort of really funny image. And I just kind of was throwing around different ideas for the title. I didn't even know I was going to write it, and then I got a cup of tea at the mouth of hell, and decided I was going to write about the devil searching for his tea kettle. And that was I initially set out to write this just sort of whimsical slice of life fantasy about the devil and his therapist in hell searching for his tea kettle. And about halfway through writing, I realized I was writing a semi-fictional autobiography, and that it was a metaphor for for me dealing with my mother's death.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
man. I mean,
I
reading it is just like, you know, it's exactly like you say. It's kind of like the reading experience sounds quite similar to the writing experience of this like transition from whimsical towards these more like autobiographical elements and you know the weight of grief and all this different kind of stuff.
yeah, exactly. And the thing that it's interesting too. There are so there are the four essays at the end of the book, but there are also like several pages in the actual story itself that I had actually written years ago. So there's I'm not gonna it's not so much a spoiler. There's the young man he's writing the letter to his dead ex-girlfriend. That was actually something that I wrote to my ex-girlfriend. Spoiler to that story, she wasn't actually dead. I found that out 2 years later. She lied to me, but that's a completely different saga.
Wow.
But the emotion at the time was very real.
Hmm. And it played into the story very well. You know, like everything
Yeah,
felt very seamless and you know, you mentioned that you started off with this kind of idea of something whimsical, and the humor and satire for me was a very important aspect of the experience, especially by
yeah,
giving an emotional range to the story, but also to the characters. You know, like Lucifer is this uh typically very theatrical and powerful character. But in this, it's kind of like, no, Lucifer's fucking sad, man. But at the same time, you have so much humor to balance out this whole experience of poor devil has lost his tea kettle, you know? So I thought
yeah.
that was amazing. And how did you approach that sort of like emotional balance between humor and grief and all these different things?
Um, honestly, I don't know. This was one of those stories where I just sort of it was very in the moment writing. So I didn't necessarily have a plan when I was going into like my writing sessions. It was just kind of like, oh, here's an idea. Let me just throw this down into a scene. But I knew um, that the narrator Stoudemire, I knew I wanted him to present himself as this sort of articulate, but also I guess I would describe him as cynical towards the end of the book.
Yeah,
He
but
was
in a funny way.
definitely a fun character. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like it, and you know, to have that balance between the devil and Stoudemire, and then also these autobiographical elements that you started to infuse into it.
Mhm.
At which point during the writing process did those elements start to blend together?
Um, I think it was maybe, oh god, it must have been like chapter 3 or 4. I had gotten to a scene break. I had just finished writing a scene for Lucifer, and I wasn't exactly sure what came next. So, just as like sort of a placeholder, I wrote this scene about, from the point of view of a young man who's just been to like this like quasi memorial for his mother and this whatever theater group, and that was um, again something I drew from my own experience. It was something that I actually went through, and so I just threw it in there as a placeholder. I wasn't really sure how it was going to factor into the story.
Mhm. Yeah, but it feels very natural, you know?
Yeah,
It doesn't I think the fact that you approached it from this sort of like slice of life angle, for Stoudemire and Lucifer and everything that's going on in hell, to have a sort of slice of life dichotomy on Earth as
yeah.
well, really helped to balance out the story. And then for you, what was it? Why was the novelette-ish length appropriate for this particular story? Because, you know, you I don't want to spoil it, but
Mhm,
you do comment on the length in this sort of
mhm.
autobiographical element towards the end. So why did it feel appropriate to end the story where you did, but also why was this sort of length satisfactory for you as a writer to finish it?
So the total length for the story just ended up being an accident, I guess. I had initially thought it was going to be closer to 18,000, 20,000 words. I thought it was actually going to be novella length. That's what I had planned. But everything sort of came together a lot quicker than I had anticipated, and the ending came to me, and I think I wrote the ending in probably like a good 5-minute burst. Like it was just one of those things that hits you, and you know it's right.
Yeah. And that I think that's a beautiful thing as a writer, but it's also a beautiful thing as a reader to be able to read that sort of just like creative burst of energy and see how it unfolds on the page. And then
Yeah,
at the same time, you follow that up with these very personal essays,
yeah.
touching on your mother's passing and mental health and grief and this kind of stuff. So, what was your thought process behind including those essays? And why did it feel appropriate for this novelette to have that sort of um that addition at the end, that insight into you and your personal life?
I mean, honestly, it was a personal. By the time I had finished writing the story itself, I realized it was something extremely personal. It's probably it's without a doubt the most personal piece of fiction I've written, and I thought it would be. It just felt appropriate to include, some supplemental material, saying like, just to, I guess, give reference to some stuff.
Mhm. And going back and I mean, I'm not sure how much kind of stuff you wrote, but going back and picking those particular essays, what was your idea behind like this one feels like the right one? Or, how did you feel personally going back and reading the stuff that you'd written in the past?
I mean, it was cathartic. It was also a bit stressful, but I looked for stuff I had written within the last 4 years because that's really sort of when I started getting into like writing about this kind of stuff. And I found four that really worked. And I mean, that was kind of that. It really kind of hit on what I was feeling when I was writing the story and when I was writing the essays.
Yeah, for sure. And you said that writing is like a really cathartic experience 9 out of 10 times,
Yeah.
hopefully. But when it comes to, mental health and, representation in fiction, why do you think it's so important for mental health to be represented in fiction and fantasy in particular? And then on top of that, what advice do you have for anyone who is writing or reading while dealing with mental health issues?
I mean, as far as writing it goes, I think it's important because if you no character should be perfect. I mean, we want to read characters that we can relate to, and for me, it's I think on some level everybody can relate with guilt, grief, loss, like whatever it is. It's one of those things that seems to be very universal, and I think doing it in for me at least, doing it in a fantastical setting helps to really just look at it from a completely different perspective.
Mm, yeah. Do you feel like fantasy gives a greater breadth of space to deal with these issues as opposed to real life where things feel a lot more, I don't know, oppressive depending on the
Yeah,
particular person and their particular circumstances?
I think so because it's not you're not I think doing it through fiction, you're not coming at it directly. It's not like in your face. It's something that you deal with gradually. It's piece by piece, and I think that's going to be far less intimidating.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on top of that, it's like, um, v- I've been thinking about this idea, the sort of concept of like the power of narrative lately, just
Mhm.
through conversations that I've had on the podcast and everything like that. But for you personally, it's like through all of your experiences across your life, reading and writing, and I would include like other creative mediums too, like art in this as well.
Yeah.
For you personally, like what power does like a narrative hold?
That'd be stumped on that one. I don't know that I actually have an answer for it.
It's all good, man. It's all good. But at the very least, it's like, you know, in terms of the things that you've been dealing with, you know, this catharsis that you speak about,
Mhm.
there seems to be a lot of power in the notion of crafting a narrative for you. On top of it's like, there are narratives that span all of, not all of human history, but modern civilization. There are ancient civilizations. There are stories that have continued on, but
Mhm.
when it comes down to an individual level, you know, a narrative holds a lot of power for you to sort of cleanse your mind or reshape your mind in really
Yeah.
powerful ways. And then on top of that, I'm curious when it comes to the readers that you have, and I don't know if you've had any
Mhm.
conversations with them on Twitter or wherever, have you gotten any responses from people that have said anything relating to their own personal issues or the way that they relate to characters and the stories that you tell?
Yeah, so in the past, I gotten maybe a couple, but A Cup of Tea at the Mouth of Hell has seemed to really, really resonate with people. As I mentioned in the book, the character's mother passes away from cancer, and that's what I dealt with. And so I've talked with a decent number of people who have you know dealt with the exact same thing, and so it was this for them, I guess, reading A Cup of Tea was this sort of God, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a way to deal with the grief without it feeling oppressive. It was, I guess,
Yeah.
cathartic.
Yeah. And on top of that, it's like, you know, the the title itself and the way in which the narrative plays out, I feel like establishes this mood of, you can laugh and you can cry, and at the end of it
Yeah,
everything's
exactly.
okay. And for you, when you came up with that title, I brought up the power of narrative, but I also think that,
Hmm.
titles hold a lot of power as well. And each of the chapters in this book has a really cheeky title. So for you, like when you were coming up with these different titles, what were you thinking? And what kind of satisfaction did you get nailing that perfect,
I
delicious chef kiss of a title?
I wanted something that very much um, was about the book, as far as like the book's title go and the chapter titles go. Um, but I also I wanted them to be as over the top as possible. And I think if you look at my other books, the chapter titles are very moody, I guess. But I'm an extremely cynical person, so it was really fun to be able to sort of write to come up with titles that were cynical and sarcastic and just really just kind of goofy at the same time. It was like you had mentioned before. For me, writing this was um, it was a very weightlifting experience. It was very fun.
Oh man, I'm so glad to hear that. And you mentioned that this was kind of like a break
Yeah.
from writing House of Muir. So, you know, how's that going and what else does the future, hold for you as a writer? What else do you have in the works?
So I still got House of Weir on hold. I'll probably start writing that again, probably closer to the end of the year, beginning of next year. Right now, I'm actually working on I guess it's sort of a spin-off of A Cup of Tea. It takes place sort of adjacent to that story. It's two completely new characters. It's I think I dropped the cover on Twitter a week or two ago. It's called Pint of Ice Cream in the Forest of Sleep, with a very cheeky subtitle, An Account of Absurdity by Piss Whisker McKean Cat. So this
Amazing.
one, I'm still writing, like writing these stories. I have a vague idea of what it's about, but it's very much the process of discovery. And so far, what I have learned about this story, Baskin Robbins exists in hell.
Of course
Um,
it does.
the narrators for this story are a very pissed off tabby cat and a satyr with a very large boner, and people are going to be either appalled or extremely amused at the way in which ice cream is paid for in hell.
Dude, I knew we get to this point. It's like every time we interact on Twitter, Crystal always jumps in there. Shit just amps up real
Yep.
fast and get really sexy and naughty. Of course you wrote about a satyr with a boner. And
I've it's I've been hanging around Dan and Crystal too long.
this is like Luke's sapphic fantasy coming into play.
It
A
really
little bit
is.
of I don't even wanna know, like, what kinda cream they use in that ice cream. Fuck.
I will say this, I I was very disappointed when nobody seemed to understand the ice cream joke I made on Twitter, and I included the flavor in the book. So it's something like the satyr in the story, the satyr walks in and he can't decide what flavor he wants, and so he asks the imp behind the counter. He asks him, "Oh, do you still have the moose knuckle tracks?" And I threw
Wow.
that out, and I said, "What?" I threw that out on social media and said, "Hey, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?" Mine's moose knuckle tracks, and somebody responded with, "Oh, I really love vanilla." I was like, "Come on, man."
I mean, if someone loves vanilla, then of course they're gonna give a vanilla response and just totally glaze over. I'm Canadian though, and so I actually really like Moose Tracks ice cream.
I love moose tracks.
But add a knuckle in there, things get really tasty.
Yeah. I think I said, "I need you to just go to Urban Dictionary and Google that and look that up for me. You'll
Oh,
be
dude,
horrified."
I cannot wait to read this. I cannot wait to read this. Amazing.
I'm hoping to have
Um,
this one out by the end of the year.
nice. Cool. Yeah, I mean, you released a cup of tea 4 months early, so I think it's
Yeah,
a nice way to follow it up with another novelette around Christmas time. Everyone can enjoy some ice
exactly.
cream around the holidays
At their own discretion.
at their own discretion. Whatever you want to, whatever flavor floats your boat.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
close things out, what are you currently reading, watching, or listening to that you'd like to share with listeners and viewers? Something awesome that you really want to put out there.
Um, what am I reading? I honestly cannot remember the last time I picked up a physical book. I read the first few pages of the first binding by R.R. Verdi, and I've enjoyed the few pages I've read so far. Just as an aside, Ronnie is a very, very lovely person to chat with. He's honest. He's one of the nicest dudes you'll ever talk to. So if you don't follow him on Twitter, I highly recommend it. So I'm starting to read that. I've been listening to the audiobook for um, Blood and Fire, Fire and Blood, whatever the hell it is. And I think I've been watching House of the Dragon. I've been watching Rings of Power, and I am on my rewatch of Sandman.
How's the rewatch going? Like, what have you experienced going through it a second time that you maybe missed out on or didn't catch during the first run through?
I don't know that I've caught anything that I may have missed so far. It's just one of the, like, I've read Sandman. It's probably my favorite graphic novel of all time. I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan, and so seeing it adapted as well as it was like it was like Christmas for me. So definitely the second rewatch has definitely just been extremely fun.
That's just been personal satisfaction, nothing else. Just selfish.
Yeah,
Rewatch
exactly.
this, bask in it.
Exactly.
Amazing, man. Well, Luke, my friend, I really appreciate you chatting with me today. And I highly recommend everyone go pick up A Cup of Tea at the Mouth of Hell. Short, hilarious, emotional, incredibly powerful. Made me cry, you son of a bitch, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you please let listeners and viewers know where they can find you on social media, where they can pick up your books?
Yeah. So I am on Twitter at Luke_Tarzian. Website is LukeTarzian.com. You can find my books on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, a whole bunch of different places. I also sell signed hard copies via my website, so check that out.
Yeah, right. And I'll include links to all that in the show notes below. But Luke, my friend, thank you again. Very lovely to see you.
You too, man. Thanks for having me.